welcome to Student Source. We're your co-hosts, Matthew and Kavion, and we're here with Wilson, a Berkeley student who's also majoring in comp sci. So,
Hello.
first of all, Wilson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We really appreciate it.
Definitely,
And so,
definitely.
before we start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, right now I am a sophomore here at Cal, uh, and intended CS. Let's see. I'm currently in, I believe, 3 organizations at Berkeley. So IEEE, students, the IEEE student branch, Data Good, and iTaught, which is also known for, as a omniscient tutor.
Okay, so you said you were a computer science major. So, what
Yeah,
influenced your decision to go into computer science?
I'd say probably. Let's roll it all the way back to probably 6th grade, when I started developing a love for video games, primarily Minecraft at the time. As funny as it is, by then, Mojang had released command blocks and such. And so that really changed the playing field. Originally, you could make things with redstone, but once you got a hold of command blocks, then you could really just have at it and customize your world as you see fit with vanilla blocks instead of actually making a mod. And from then on, in high school, I started taking college courses. So I actually took C++ at San Jose City College. And I also took APCSP as well as APCSA. Both were really amazing courses. And on the side, I sort of developed a love for coding, right? So I just started wanting to learn more about specific languages, and especially ways to exploit those languages to my advantage.
So, as a computer science major, what would you personally recommend high school students do if they want to follow a similar path with you into computer science?
Oh, okay. So I would suggest to get good at Googling, right? So a lot of times I see people struggling on a CS problem, mostly because they want to try to solve it, right? But there are lots of, like, if you Google it, it's probably one of the very first things that pops up, right? So if you have some sort of question regarding how a certain piece of code works, you could just Google it and it'd probably be the first result, right? You don't have to spend hours trying to figure out how something works when you could read it up immediately and then try to process it and understand clearly, oh yeah, so this works this way. I'm going to now apply it and try to remember it. So then I don't have to research up, uh, res research that question that I had regarding some language, right? And another thing I would say is to go out of your bounds of comfort, right? A lot of times people would just, okay, I'm going to do this assignment, right? With some code, they're not really going to go and try to figure out why something actually works the way it does, right? Um, People take for granted a lot of libraries that have been already pre-created for you on the internet, shared on the internet, right? A lot of open source software. And a lot of times you can look at the software and you'd be like, wow, this is really inefficient, right? Um, I could have coded this much better, instead of just grabbing this piece of this library and adding more bloatware into my software.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, some of these things do apply when you're in college. But is there anything else that you'd recommend for like college students specifically? Maybe to like manage like a bigger workload, maybe.
In terms of managing bigger workloads, I'd say starting to read the documentation for libraries beforehand and actually tinkering with it, right? So the important thing is tinkering and testing. A lot of times I'll have people who've created some piece of code, right? They send it to me, I look at it, and I send it immediately back. Why? It's because they haven't tested the code. So there is no point in me actually testing the code myself if they haven't even tested the code to see if it works, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's another thing. and having the knowledge beforehand by reading the documentation really helps, right? So if you know how a specific set of code works, or if you know that there are certain libraries that you could use to your advantage, right? Then you could use those libraries instead of having to recode something that's already been done, right?
So can you give us like a basic breakdown of your major? Like what are some things you particularly like or dislike about being a comp sci major?
So I like the coding part. What I don't like is the discrete mathematics part, because for Berkeley, we actually have, well, actually, there's three, I'll categorize it into three parts. So we have electrical engineering, right? That's part of what we need to do. That, or you can do a higher levels of math, right? So you need to have a really strong math mindset, right? Especially later on, you'll have to take discrete mathematics, which is probably my biggest struggle right now. But in terms of like the coding part, I really love coding. I really love trying to figure out how to make this code, like how to format it nicely, how to make it flow nicely, make it really simple and clean for the uh, the TAs to grade and professors to look at.
Also, you're going to UC Berkeley, which is like, a really good school. Do you have any other tidbits of advice for high school students that will be applying to college soon?
For high school students that are applying soon, I would tell them to write as much about it, to try to be as humble as possible. I know it's a really cheesy thing, but a lot of times the college reviewers, or the college paper reviewers, would look at whether or not you've been doing something for a long time, right? So if you can stick that in there subtly, right, then it's pretty good. So you have to have a dying passion for something, and you have to demonstrate some sort of hardship that you overcame, right? I think those are the two biggest things that come out of college essays, right? For me personally, I actually didn't have a lot of volunteering experience. So, I'll actually tell you how many hours of volunteering I did and I submitted, right? I think I submitted like 16 hours, right? And you have other kids who've submitted hundreds or thousands of hours, right? However, growing up, that's also another thing. So growing up, how your environment, what environment were you grown up in, and whether or not you took advantage of that environment.
Okay, so I know you mentioned that you turn in code to TAs and professors sometimes. Is there like a project that you can think of, something like that we'd be able to understand as like high school students, and kind of like talk about like what it was and how you went around accomplishing it? Maybe like something that you did in high school, perhaps.
Let's see. We could talk about something that I so there's a lot of projects that I did over in high school, mostly because of I just had to apply coding to it somehow, right? That's because I just really wanted to apply coding to it. And I actually I took Japanese in high school, and for one of my finals, my professor was like, okay, so everybody here has the option to do whatever you want, as long as it demonstrates your knowledge of Japanese, of grammar, writing, and so on and so forth, vocabulary, right? And is presentable, right? I believe I jokingly said, I'm going to make a video game, or some along the lines of that. And I eventually did that in a span of like 3 weeks. So the art assets and everything was it was very hectic until the very end.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of, I guess I had to learn how to properly do some photoshopping, right? So Photoshop skills, doing lots of research on web development, collision algorithms, and so on and so forth, because I really wanted to hardcore code everything, right? That was also another flaw that I'd say was a big flaw during the time. I should have relied on some other libraries, but I decided to do everything by myself. So I made like the physics engine by myself. I made all of the entities by myself. Everything was like basically done by myself, and so on and so forth. So it was very hectic. But I believe I wrote around a page or more worth of, actually, I think I wrote a lot of pages worth of Japanese and submitted it to my my professor so then she could look at it. And yeah, so really
Wow.
mixing together classwork and a hobby that I really enjoyed.
Really interesting. All right. I think that's all the questions that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And this was certainly helpful and it's given us a lot to think about. And we wish you the best of luck in any future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Matthew and Kapian.